Victoria Caspi. I'm a professor of physics here at McGill and director of the McGill Space Institute. And it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome you all to McGill University. Je vous souhaite toute la bienvenue à l'Université McGill, and especially His Excellency, the Right Honourable David Johnston, Governor General of Canada. The Governor General is no stranger to McGill, having been Principal and Vice Chancellor here from 1979 to 1994, was awarded an honorary doctorate of laws in 2000, and he is the official visitor of McGill University. This lesser-known role, which I only learned about in preparing this, dates to the Royal Charter of 1852, under which McGill operates. At the time of the charter, the Governor of Lower Canada was appointed as a visitor, a role that since Confederation has been played by the Governor-General of Canada. I'm particularly delighted to be welcoming him here, as he was principal when I graduated from McGill, and he capped me. And I think we should all be particularly impressed that His Excellency is here in spite of Ottawa playing in Game 7 of the semifinals of the Stanley Cup playoffs tonight. That's true dedication. And Your Excellency, they may have told you that the McGill Senior Administration is at a board meeting, but I bet they're all watching the game. And of course, we're all here, nous sommes tous ici, because McGill University is proud to celebrate the publication of Ingenious, how Canadian innovators made the world smarter, smaller, kinder, safer, healthier, wealthier, and happier. Written by Governor General David Johnston with Tom Jenkins. C'est aussi un grand honneur d'introduire notre animatrice pour ce soir, Madame Marie-Claude Lortie. Madame Lortie est journaliste à la presse depuis presque 30 ans, où elle est coloniste dans la section des affaires et critique gastronomique. Elle a porté plusieurs chapeaux à la presse au cours de sa carrière et a été correspondant parlementaire à Ottawa. Elle a aussi publié 13 livres à l'édition La Presse. Elle a gradué de McGill en sciences politiques en 1986 et sa fille aînée, Juliette, entre à McGill en sciences cognitives en septembre cette année. Nous comptons sur elle pour plus d'innovation canadienne. Sans plus tarder, c'est mon grand plaisir de vous présenter Madame Marie-Claude Lortie.
Thank you extremely very much, Victoria Caspi. I just want to say one thing that's quite crucial about her is that she's in the book. She's one of those great innovators, great inventors. I would really love to be able to explain to you what she invented, but I think I will wait for His Excellency to do it later, maybe her as well, because it's quite complicated. It has to do with zombie stars and astrophysics and planets and the skies, and she told me, if you want to say an extra thing about me, tell everybody that we're building a new telescope. She's super excited about this. So I think she's the person. I think not only is she a great innovator, but I think she's a great role model for all of us to innovate more, and also especially young women who want to be scientists. And I think they should look forward to this great telescope and all the fun and amazement we're going to get from this. So, this being said, I think we should learn a lot more about these innovators. Je pense que ce serait vraiment cool d'en savoir beaucoup plus sur tous les inventeurs dont on parle dans ce livre vraiment impressionnant qui a été publié par les éditions La Presse. Évidemment, j'ai l'air un peu de patriotique en disant ça, mais je pense que c'est un livre qui va tous nous inspirer à inventer plus peut-être, puis surtout à être vraiment fiers de la culture scientifique et de l'imagination de notre pays. And I think I really want to thank personally His Excellency and Tom Jenkins for publishing a book that is so inspiring for all of us to be more innovative and to be more creative and to be proud also. Alors, je veux absolument vous présenter l'auteur de ce livre, Son Excellence, le très honorable le gouverneur général du Canada, David Johnston.
Thanks, Marie-Claude. Thank you. Merci.
Merci à vous. Alors, évidemment, la première question que je veux vous poser, the first question, obviously, is how did you have this idea to write this book, and why did you want to do it so much?
Well, my first answer is to say what a delight it is to be back home at McGill. Je suis chez moi. And to be introduced by Vicky, who, yes, was one of the great outstanding stars of your graduating class. And yes, I capped you, Vicky. And I'll shortly have a chance to cap you again when you will be invested as a companion of the Order of Canada, our very highest honor. And that's public because Vicky is able to wear the red maple leaf and the red snowflake, which designates companion. I should tell you, with companions, there's a limited number of them. I think it's 160, Vicky. So there's probably a price on your head. Somebody has to get knocked off before there's another space. There we are. One of the youngest people to become companion. Why did we write the book, Marie-Claude? Nous avons commencé cette aventure pour renforcer la culture d'innovation ici au Canada. We wanted to reinforce, to strengthen, and to advance the culture of innovation in Canada. There are many steps to that, but probably the one that would be most marked in my mind was my installation speech was entitled Smart and Caring Country, a Call to Service, with three pillars, family and children, learning and innovation, philanthropy and volunteerism. And they come together in the notion of doing things better. Darwin once said, it's not the strongest or the most powerful species that will survive, it's the most resilient. And if you want to be resilient, you have to think constantly of doing things better, not simply technologically, but also business, social, etc. C'est la raison.
Okay. If you want to have a bit of an idea of the kind of topics that the book talks about, we have a short video that will show you some of the great inventions of Canada. I think one of them is peanut butter. Did you know this?
C'est ça.
Before the arrival of the modern touchscreens that we use almost daily, there were many early prototypes, but one of the biggest advances in touch technology came from Canada. In 1982, the Input Research Group at the University of Toronto made a breakthrough in screen technology, making a touchscreen that could allow for multiple points of contact at once. A huge wave of design and research followed, and now we can pinch, zoom, and scroll to our heart's content. Canada has a long and innovative history. You can find more stories of Canadian innovations that made the world smarter, wealthier, and happier in the pages of Ingenious. Learn more about the power of Canadian ideas here.
L'inventeur américain George Washington Carver a fabriqué de nombreux produits à base d'arachide. Le beurre d'arachide, cependant, vient plutôt d'un Canadien, Marcellus Gilmore Edson. Le pharmacien québécois a découvert que l'on obtenait un fluide épais en chauffant à 100 degrés les surfaces servant à broyer les arachides. Bien entendu, c'était avant le beurre d'arachide crémeux. Désolé, Monsieur Carver. L'innovation fait partie de l'histoire du Canada. Découvrez comment les Canadiens ont créé un monde plus sain, prospère et heureux dans les pages du livre Ingenieux. Renseignez-vous sur le pouvoir des idées canadiennes à innovationculture.ca.
Say that these little minutes or half minutes are one of the many platforms or avenues that we have taken in trying to reinforce the culture of innovation. And this is inspired by the Heritage Minutes that Charles Bronfman started. The story there is that Charles was being inducted into the Order of Canada and listening to the stories of the diversity of the country, people who desire a better country. He said, why don't we know more about this country? Why don't we know more about these inspiring people? Somebody should do something. And then he said, Charles, you're a wealthy man, you do. And that's how the Heritage Minutes were created. So we're doing these videos, which will be shorter stories of innovation. We've got 10 of them now. We'll have many more. Innovationculture.ca is the website. We want people to register there. The stories we've missed, the mistakes we've made in telling these stories. We hope to have 1,000 of those. E for One you saw up there, that's an education program that Nipissing University has developed with 3 professors and about 300 teacher interns who've contributed now about 100,000 volunteer hours to do the lesson plans for teachers to deal with innovation from kindergarten to grade 12. The Museum of Science and Technology will collect the story basis and so on. So it's a number of things all intended to promote the culture of innovation. In today's Globe and Mail, if you look at the folio section in the center of it, page 7 and 8, it shows the 6 winners this year of the Governor General Innovation Awards, a splendid presentation. All attempting to say we all can do things better, and that's what innovation is all about.
Did you know when you accepted to be Governor General that you would have all this work to do?
Well, it's not really work, it's so much fun. But you know, I have a secret to tell you. I've never really worked. I'm on a 1-year leave of absence from my law firm, where I was supposed to do my articles of indenture, and they liberated me for 1 year to be a law professor, and they said, when you've got the courage to come and face the real world, come and we'll teach you how to practice law. That was 52 years ago, and they're terrified that I might do that someday.
So, can you tell us a bit about the people you worked with on the book?
Sure. My definition of leadership is recognizing your total dependence on the people around you, and we have a lot of people who worked on this. Annabelle right there is our Director of Communications. We have 2 or 3 speechwriters who work with her, and if I say anything intelligent, it's usually because they formulated the ideas. Tom Jenkins, who's an old friend, the guy that took OpenText from a little fledgling company to a 12,000 person world playing software content provider today, came to me about 3 years ago and said, you know, you talk about innovation, but you should have some Governor General Innovation Awards. And then through the Rita Hall Foundation, we raised $5 million to create the program for the awards. And then I guess it was Tom's idea that we should do a book telling some of the stories. And so that's how the book came about and all of these other programs. We started, Marie-Claude, with 50 stories. We wanted to tell 50 stories. And we were flabbergasted. There were so many more than 50. And we got to 150 for our 150th anniversary. And we kept going, and we got to 297 stories, and the publisher said, that's as many as we can put in the book. So the others will put on innovationculture.ca.
Et comment on trouve les innovations? On sait qu'il y a Céline Dion, on sait qu'il y a Maurice Richard, on a inventé ça. Oui. On savait pour, je pense, le masque protecteur pour le hockey. Oui. Mais toutes les autres choses, c'est long.
C'est de grande variété, n'est-ce pas? Et ça inclut l'innovation sociale. Par exemple, une des innovations, c'est le charte des droits des personnes, the Chart of Human Rights. C'était John Humphrey, un collègue professeur à McGill, la faculté de droit à McGill. John était le secrétaire pour le comité pour les droits humains des Nations Unies en 1945. Eleanor Roosevelt était le président de ce conseil, et c'est John qui a préparé le premier projet et le final projet pour la charte. C'est une innovation canadienne. Un exemple, ici à McGill.
Mais et comment on fait pour les trouver? How did you look for them? Because you don't Google Canadian inventions.
That was so interesting. Tom, being an engineer and I being a lawyer, says, well, there's got to be an archives with all these stories. Is it the National Research Council? Is it the Library and Archives of Canada? Is it the Museum of Science and Technology? We hadn't collected them. We Canadians are not as good as we should be in collecting these stories and then telling them. So with a number of partners, those 3, Archives Canada, Museum of Science and Technology, National Research Council, the 3 Guardian Councils, Canadian Foundation of Innovation, several others, we put together the stories. And so the Museum of Science and Technology will now have all the statistics and the detail there. Innovationculture.ca will be the web base, and we'll continue to accumulate them so people can tap in and prepare their own versions.
And add, maybe?
Ajouter constamment. On doit continuer l'innovation constamment.
I'd like to talk about those innovations. There are 297 in the book. I think you must have some favorites.
Many. Well, a number. Vicky with the zombie stars is in the book. And zombie stars are not quite black holes, but they're getting there. And when they get there, they really do disappear. But they are very, very, very heavy. And they're very, very important because they tell us a great deal about the origins of the universe. And they help to explain Einstein's theory of relativity. And they both reinforce and I think raise questions about some of the classical laws of physics that are not completely developed yet. And there are many surprises. So that's an innovation in basic science. Another one that I love is we tell the story of Rudy Marcus, who in 1991 won a Nobel Prize, Montrealer, McGill grad, for the theory of the transfer of electrons. And it's interesting. Ernest Rutherford was a professor here at McGill from 1895 to 1905. Went back, he's a New Zealander, went back to England in 1905, and he won the Nobel Prize in chemistry in 1907 for explaining the theory of atomic energy. He knew that if you could split an atom, it would provide a great deal of energy. But he didn't split the atom. We didn't have the experimental techniques. He had the theory. And it was Niels Bohr, is that right, Vicki? Niels Bohr around about 1931 or so that did the experiment to split the atom and the atomic bomb. But Marcus's work in 91 on the transfer of electrons was built on the theory that Rutherford had, that if you split an atom, electrons and other things would go out and would create great bundles of energy. And we stand on the shoulders of the giants who go before. Vicki's work would be based on so many important theoretical principles, some well established, others in their formation, and we build and build and build that. And that's the culture of innovation. I have many others.
Yes, okay, let's go through some of
I'll cease and desist for a moment.
Okay, I was looking at the list. One of my favorite is the telephone.
Yeah.
That's crazy that we invented this.
Yeah, the telephone was Alexander Graham Bell. The Americans claim it was invented there, but it was Alexander Graham Bell that did it. And he was essentially a hearing therapist. He worked with people who had hearing difficulties. And then he got interested in how you transfer sound into electronic signals. And from that came the telephone. Roger Fessenden, a name you probably don't know, but he came from the Eastern Township. East Talbot, do I have it right? One of the small villages near Dunham. Again? East Talbot. That's it. And he was taken as a young man to see Alexander Graham Bell. He'd be a young person of 15 or 16. Bell would probably be 70. And what he was interested in doing was presenting speech into electronic signals so it could be carried over the airwaves. Marconi, a year before, had developed a way of giving electronic signals, dots and dashes, for example, the Morse code, which would be translated and then transcribed or translated to form. But Fessenden actually took the sound of the voice and put them into electronic signals which would travel on airwaves, and that became telephone or communication over the air. Not nearly as famous as Marconi, because Marconi got the license to develop wireless transmission. But Fessenden was so important because he was the beginning of how you took voice messages and put it in electronic signals. Fast forward, Mike Lazaridis is in the book twice. One for the two-way messenger, about 1994, and the second for the BlackBerry. And among other things, those two innovations build on Fessenden and other people's theory.
Yeah, that was my question. That was going to be my other question. The BlackBerry people, did they know that they wanted to bring this invention to the next level? Is it part of a culture? Is it part of a tradition?
It's innovation is the Latin word for innovation is innovare, which means to refresh or alter. Interesting. Invention is from invenire, which means to come into or to arrive at. Kind of discovering. Découvert is to uncover completely. Découvert, the Latin word. So you've got discovery, to uncover completely these laws that Vicki is figuring out. And then you've got the invention, which is to come into, to see the glimpse. But then you have innovation, which is refresh or alter, which is usually a series of steps forward, not just like one building on them. So in the case of Mike's two-way pager, what he did is doctors used to carry a little pager on their belt, and a signal would come in, call operating room at this number. They then go to a phone and call. He figured out a way to send that message back by some very interesting coding. Then when he got to the BlackBerry, this would be 1997, 98, we had cell phones in that time. And what they did is they carried voice over the airwaves. Fessenden, huh? But Mike figured out a way to carry data, text over the airwaves. But the radio spectrum that was being used for voice over the airways was very, very expensive. It's allocated by government auction. But there was a part of the spectrum that was used for paging that was very inexpensive because it was not used very much. Mike was able to change his coding, so for the BlackBerry, he could have it go over the pager part of the spectrum and rendered it much cheaper. And he also figured a way of, he started packets. He took the text information and broke the words up into little packets, and then those packets would be sent out as signals, and then they'd be reassembled by coding at the other end and presented as the text that you read. So that was his great breakthrough, is that he took the mobile phone and it became text. The other thing he did, and we're still building on that, is he developed a very well encrypted way of coding messages called BlackBerry Messenger, and that today is still the most secure form of coding, and that's why BlackBerry is now coming back, I think, because it's done very well with its encrypted signals, and it has developed another innovation called QNX, which is a software system that is the basis of BlackBerry and the basis of the audio systems that you have in your automobiles. Long story.
Yes, yeah, but I was going to say, it's now with iPhones everywhere, we forget that not long ago, phones were only used to talk.
Big time.
And it's really BlackBerry that changed it.
Big time.
And
I remember
started going on the web.
About 1985, my friend Pat Kenneth, the rector of Concordia, undertook a community responsibility for the government of Quebec, and he had a cell phone because it was important. He was in constant contact. Coming to the meetings, it was like a huge lunchbox. It was just a huge thing. But miniaturization has been such an important part of this development. We've done three things. We've permitted ourselves to see things smaller. That's the microscope. And what we have in a BlackBerry today, we had in a 360 computer that would fill this room 30 years ago. We see farther. That's what Vicki work has done. And with the computer, we are now seeing in more detail and being able to assess large amounts of information and be much more selective about how we arrange it.
Parmi mes préférés aussi, il y a les inventions qui viennent des Premières Nations.
Oui.
Puis je pense qu'il y en a plusieurs dans votre livre.
Oui.
Le sirop d'érable, ça se peut.
Oui.
Les igloos.
Oui.
Et un que je ne savais pas, c'est les ceintures de sauvetage.
Oui.
Vous pouvez nous en parler?
Oh, on a plusieurs. Mais je n'ai pas le détail de cette particular innovation, mais c'est vraiment canadien et ça a eu un impact important pour les populations en commune. Et c'est une des choses que nous avons utilisées pour choisir les histoires dans le livre, les innovations qui ont eu le plus grand impact et à la promesse pour un impact pour l'avenir.
Okay. So tell us about some of your favorites.
Oh, there's so many. I read.
From McGill, maybe?
Oh, now more from McGill. I've spoken. I could go into a great number. Peanut butter is not McGill, but it's Montreal, and people think that is
quite important.
An American invention, and it's actually attributed to George Washington Carver, but it was a chemist in Quebec that found that when you heated peanuts to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, they turned quite liquid, quite gluey, and then as they started to cool, it formed this creamy butter, and then he added some things to it that made it very well. One of my favorites is the life jacket, which actually is not McGill, much earlier than McGill. It's pre-colonial times. It was something the Inuit developed. And when they were seal hunting, if you fell off the ice fall, you wouldn't worry about drowning. You'd worry about not getting out of the water quickly enough before hypothermia took you away. So with seal skins and caribou sinew, they developed a kind of clothing that covered the torso right down to the legs, left the legs and the arms free so that you could struggle your way. And that was what kept them warm. That later became the life jacket. And how many children how many people have had their lives saved by life jackets? How many children have learned how to swim with life jackets? That's an important one. Another one that's important to me is the light bulb. And we have the expression, the light goes on. You know that expression? Well, the light goes on was actually two inventors here in Montreal, I believe, who realized that if you passed an electrical current through a very resistant material, tungsten would be what we use today, but didn't allow electricity to pass very quickly like aluminum and copper do, that resistance would cause a glow, a very substantial glow, and heat as well, and that was light. They patented it, so they had it protected. But a classic Canadian story, there was not the capital, the financial capital, nor the intellectual capital to take that and add other inventions to it to make it a light bulb that you could manufacture cheaply. And it was Thomas Edison, who had started the General Electric Company about 10 years before in the United States, who himself was a great inventor, but was an agglomerator of invention. He would get patents of other people and developed a wonderful manufacturing and marketing machine, which is General Electric today, a company that survived for 170 years because it's been so resilient and had people like Edison leading it. So the light bulb was a Canadian invention.
And did you find inventions that you were actually surprised to learn that they were Canadian?
You know, if Tom and I were asked to give one word about this journey we've had, it would be flabbergasted. We just didn't know about those. I suppose of the 297, I might have known 20 or 25 that were Canadian and not the details of them. But the 297 is we're just scratching the surface. I mean, we get wonderful, outrageous complaints. Mark Perron, this wasn't an outrageous complaint. He's a wonderful guy. Mark heads CAE, and I was at a conference at the Perimeter Institute a week ago, and Mark very politely said, well, you know, we do 70% of the world's flight simulators from CAE here in Montreal. We put that together through innovation with very elaborate coding, et cetera, and we train 70% of the world's pilots how to fly. And now we're training medical students how to understand anatomy without having to have a cadaver to go at. That's a Canadian invention right here in Montreal that, you know, we missed, and we've missed many more. But the great thing is tell those stories and they get better and better.
And do you see some patterns, though, some sectors that we're better in, or is it really everywhere?
Well, number one, I think we were struck by the diversity, including social innovation, a concept that is not entirely well understood, but Canada is a social innovation. It's innovative in the sense that here is a country that's been put together on the theory that diversity and inclusiveness can actually work and work to your advantage. That if you somehow bring different experiences together, you can have a more creative result. If you have the inclusiveness and the tolerance of people are prepared to respect one another and learn from one another and grow. That's a social innovation that is quite clear. I think also you find that societies generally become more innovative in dealing with challenges in their environment. And I think that's one of the reasons that we have quite a substantial number of communication innovations in Canada, because transporting and communicating across this large land, especially in a harsh climate, was not easy. And you had to think smarter to make it happen. So the Inuit people, one of their innovations is I think there are 17 different ways of describing the word snow. We use one word, snow, and then we would have adjectives like fluffy snow or hard snow, etc. But they had to deal with it. Igloo is a pre-Confederation innovation, and it's a wonderful structure. One, because structurally it's very sound. It's built this way so that it leans in, the pressures are in, and it actually strengthens rather than crumbling. Two, the material is very available, it's snow. Three, you need only very crude instruments to carve out those blocks of snow. Four, with the pressure from block of ice or block of snow, there's a little melt and it actually is cement that holds it together. Five, you put a little hole in the ceiling and the warmth of human beings inside actually keeps it warm. So it was a wonderful invention for how to deal with a harsh climate. The canoe, the dog sled, those are Canadian inventions. The canoe is how we got across this country before the railway, etc. All coming from our pre-Confederation history. For me, I'm like a kid in the candy store with this stuff. because I find the story so interesting, but then I say, why do you do this? You do things to make things better, pour améliorer les conditions humaines.
And then after the canoe, there was the snowmobile.
You bet. Armand Bombardier, and the story behind that story is, it was 1934 in Valcourt. His son had what we now know was appendicitis in the middle of a snowstorm, and he couldn't get his son to the hospital and couldn't get a doctor, so his son died. And so he said, I have to do something about that. And it took him 3 years to essentially build the first snowmobile in 1937, so that people in emergency can get to one place to another. And then it became an important transport vehicle, particularly for military, and now it's become a recreational vehicle.
Yes, but it's still very much of an important transportation vehicle outside of the cities.
C'est ça.
We had a big snowstorm in Quebec this year.
Essentially for life and security. And so many of our Canadian inventions have been that way. You look at a country like Israel, it's called Startup Nation or Innovation Nation. It's been very inventive because life has been harder when you're in a little country that is attempting to establish itself, when you're surrounded by many people who don't want you to be a country and don't want you to survive. Singapore is a very innovative place, and again, it's been carved out of a very hostile environment from Malaysia 50 years ago, and you often find societies that are more hard-pressed or more innovative. Finland is a very innovative country. They were at war with 3 different enemies during World War II, the Russians, the Germans, and then the Russians again.
So what do we need to do now for more innovation, to get more?
To encourage especially young people to say we can all innovate, because innovation is simply doing things better, doing things better. And to develop that attitude of mind that no matter what your situation is, what your job is, what your neighborhood is, to say, how do I make this a little better? So I've been a university manager for many years, and I'm a little annoying because I'll often be in your department. I say, tell me which of the Canadian universities is doing your discipline in a really interesting way, or you're running one of our IT sections. Where do you go to figure out how to do these things better? Always learning from other people. And I guess I would say, I was saying earlier, Marie-Claude, that I've reached the age where all the important things in life I've learned from my children, and now I'm learning from the 14 grandchildren. And I watched my 5 daughters, and around about age 12, they became very conscious of international experiences. They began to do exchanges, and they loved it. And we grew up in a comfortable family, but our children were exposed through their church, through volunteer associations, sometimes through their school, to hardship and to different circumstances of people, and they became very interested in that. And out of that experience of difference, I saw 4 features of their personalities that in French we say their transformation, their formation. One, they became more curious, and all children are curious. Secondly, they became more tolerant, not just tolerant and you're different from me. That's okay, nobody gets hurt. But what makes you different? What is about your French-Canadian heritage that is different than my English-Canadian heritage? And what do we learn from one another?
Better food.
Thirdly, their judgment became better because they're quick to spot bigotry. They look for the other side of the story. They want another angle on things to triangulate to get an answer. But most important of all, they become more empathetic. Not just sympathetic, but empathetic. They can walk in the other person's shoes. To come back to this social innovation of Canada, to me, that's one of our great strengths, that we've learned to accommodate. We've learned to avoid extreme positions. We work hard at finding common ground out of difference. And we're inclusive, an inclusive people, and therefore have respect for other people. And that's still a social experiment that is ongoing and continues, something we have to work at.
And yeah, that was one of my last questions. Do you have you thought about sectors where you think we should put more energy to invent solutions to current problems, poverty, the situation of the First Nations, the
Well, the First Nation is it's an enormous challenge for us. I think it's our single most domestic challenge, and I would say, in many ways, a failure of Canada of not being the inclusive country that we want. You take the statistics on education, for example, they're woeful for people on reserves. That's something that we as Canadians simply must all be involved in and use reconciliation as our theme going forward. I think what Tom and I were trying to do in the book, and what we were trying to do with the culture of innovation, is to encourage people to think that we all can do things better, and that life is a whole lot more fun when you do that as well. Life is a lot more fun when you move from the first person singular to the first person plural, from me to we, that you're no longer the center of the universe, that your universe is made up of other people around you, and you get a great sense of satisfaction when you're doing something that improves their condition. And I think that's the heart of innovation. I think that's why Canadians do have some important lessons that we will not preach to the world, but we will make available to the world of how you can make diversity work for you.
I will invite everybody in the room to ask questions to His Excellency to continue the discussion. There are some mics somewhere. Yes. And I have tons more questions in my mind, but I'm here to share.
Let the cross-examination begin. Good to have a lawyer cross-examined as well. And you were very kind in your cross-examination, Marie-Claude.
Hello. It's very, very nice to have you here. In fact, I'm with the Fraser Hickson Library, and you actually you were a co-chair about 15 years ago. So my question is about literacy. And we have a program right now where we're going out into the community with mini biblios to make sure that children will read. And I want to know, can you hear me? I think my mic went off. Okay. Anyways, my question is, how would you innovate as far as literacy goes? Because we use the book. We're firm believers in using the books, and we're firm believers in getting parents to read to their kids. Now, I want your opinion on how we can make this a national, of national importance. But I'd like to know your take on how we can even be more innovative.
How do we innovate to improve literacy and to continue in that direction?
My number 5 daughter should be here to answer that question. She gets very annoyed at me. She says, Dad, if I were the Board of Governors of McGill or the Board of Governors of Waterloo, I'd fire you. Like that. She says, you still allow people to get up and lecture and the students take notes? She says, that's about 20% learning efficient. If you want to move up to 75%, you need effective learning. So Mike Lazaridis, when he did the two-way pager, was a co-op student at the University of Waterloo, where I last was president, which is the largest co-op university in the world, with the students alternate a work term with a academic term. And Mike was in his 4th work term, like many Waterloo students, starting his own company, not working for someone else. But he asked to stay on for another 4 months because the company was going. And they let him stay out for 4 more months, but then he wanted another 4 months and said, no, that's it, you've got to come back. So he never finished his degree. The reason he didn't come back is he then had 5 people working for him. And they had given up their other jobs, and he says, I can't abandon them. They're dependent on me. And that's kind of driven him. But that, for me, experiential learning is very attractive because it's theory and practice hand in hand. The most practical thing in the world is a good general theory. Test me on this, Vicki. Is a good general theory, provided you're constantly testing it against reality and adjusting it accordingly. All models are wrong. Some are useful. You have to figure out which ones. So I would go back to how we create curiosity in children. And I'm not hung up of them reading a hard copy book, and reading e-reader is fine, but it's that notion of curiosity and discovery. Tom Friedman, in his latest book, Thanks for Being Late, speaks about the age of accelerations, and he says, our answer to be more resilient in the pace of this change, where our human capacity is not as quick, is the 3 R's, going back to those. And then he adds 4 C's. And the 4 C's are curiosity, collaboration, communication, and his 4th is coding. Now, Tom Jenkins, my engineer partner, says, yeah, coding. I'm not quite there yet. I'd still see coding as a tool as opposed to an instrument of learning. Instead of the C for coding, I would have curiosity and creativity as it. To come back to my daughter, she had a learning disability that was discovered about age 10, number 5 daughter. And she came home from school one day and said, "I'm not stupid." And we said, "Of course you're not stupid, dear." "Well, the teacher says I'm stupid." So her rather slow parents kind of woke up. And we thought our kids were all English speaking, gone into French schools. She seemed to have a little more difficulty. She was also left-handed. And we didn't know that in her maternelle, you remember that, Shirley, one of the other teachers said, one of the other mothers said, "You should ask why your daughter has a black and blue left hand. It's because the nun was beating her on the hand to get the devil out of it." So the left-handed, she would say today that we used to think left-handedness was a learning disability. We used to fail kids who were left-handed when they were learning to write because they'd smudge. They write this way, and they had to write with pen and ink. So then ballpoint pen came along, and that impediment was removed. She did a doctorate in how the mind learns to figure out what was in her mind, because the person that dealt with her at 10 said, "You're not stupid. It's just that you have 25 different learning tools, and you've got one that's not working. You can't process spatial relationships. And another one that is putting things together doesn't work very well. So here's the navigation route we'll organize to get you around that, and here's how we emphasize the other learning tools." So she says, "Dad, that's how you teach people. You learn about effective learning. You learn to take advantage of all the learning tools, and you develop the strategy so that you're navigating around the weak and maximizing the strong." So when she was a student here at McGill doing Russian and history, in the Russian course, she and her colleagues says, "We want to speak Russian, we just don't want to write it." And they couldn't get enough conversation, so they found a part of the city where there was an old age home of senior residence for Russian people attached to the Russian Orthodox Church. Many of these people spoke neither French nor English, so they taught them French and English, and they would read to them, and these people would teach them Russian. And they would speak. And my daughter, being my daughter, then came to the Senate of McGill, where I was the chairman, and insisted that the students get credit for these excursions, teaching people English and French and learning Russian, which she, being my daughter, succeeded in doing. And that's experiential learning. And she would say, the more you can do of that, the more you heighten the curiosity, and then kids will read. And they'll read because they want to find out, to make things work. Long answer, sorry.
Okay, other question. Oh, here's one.
Hi there. My name's Kira Smith, and I'm a soon-to-be graduate of McGill next week. Hopefully all goes well with the ceremony. So I heard you speak earlier at Universities Canada, the conference Converge in February, about the potential of all university students. I really enjoyed what you had to say then. It was in February, excuse me. And so I was wondering now, I know we're all here at McGill, so maybe ask you to be a little bit partial to our demographic, but so how is McGill as a community uniquely positioned to innovate in Canada?
I didn't hear the question. How
is the McGill community uniquely positioned to innovate in Canada? So be a little bit partial to us here and tell us why we're special.
What is so special about McGill, basically?
Well, I'm completely objective on the subject, of course.
Especially for innovation. What makes McGill so innovative?
It's just such an enormous pool of talent, and it has such a diverse population. It has the highest entrance standards of any Canadian university. If you have the highest entrance standard, you should be able to choose people that are going to do pretty well. You like to think that they get a little bit on the way through, that you have an environment where they're very stimulated. But I think McGill's strengths would be the diversity of the population it attracts. It's been Canada's most international university for a long time. It's had to work harder than other universities. It's essentially a private university until after World War II, really depending upon benefactions. Moyse Hall, built for Dean Moyse by the Molson family, etc. And it has also attracted talent from the rest of the world. When I came in '79, we were having difficulty recruiting professors because prior to 1970, if McGill had a vacancy in English literature or in astronomy, astrophysics, political science, it would say, okay, list the 5 best political theorists in the country, the 5 best in order, and we'll approach the first one, may or may not get him or her, second one. Usually you get one in the top 3 or 4 because they'd want to come to McGill. It was just a drawing place. That actually changed dramatically in that period of time. So what we did was, we said, number one, if your department has a vacancy, don't feel compelled to fill it this year. We will not take it away with you with a budget cut next year. Don't wait 3 or 4 years, but don't feel an urgency to fill it. Secondly, we'll provide you with more travel money to do an international search, not just a Canadian or an American search. And 3, take the time to get good talent. And what happened was the place became even more diverse, and we found so many people from so many parts of the world saying, we want to come to McGill, there's something special about it. And they did, and so that diversity increased quite dramatically. The other thing I would say is it's a very idealistic place. McGill is a member of the American Universities Association. It's the 50 or so most research-intensive universities in the US. 2 Canadian members, Toronto and McGill. I would go to those meetings faithfully, and my American colleagues would be complaining about their medical school and their hospital. They were so expensive. Hospitals often run by the university, ours fortunately run by the state. And the medical school, because the professors were so expensive, and they said, as president, we get the dean of medicine coming in and said, you know, if I don't have this other $10 million for this kind of equipment, people are going to die. How do you deal with an argument like that? And I said, you know, I guess I must be living in a different world, but I have nothing but the most pleasant experiences dealing with our faculty of medicine. Dick Cruz was the dean of medicine for the 15 years that I was, 14 of the 15 years I was president. I've met many great academic leaders. This was the number one. And I don't ever remember a conversation with Dick or his colleagues saying, we have to have this. It was, we understand the situation. How do we make the conditions to go and find it? So their external fundraising was remarkable. And I would tell my American colleagues, I said, well, we have 1,500 nil salary professors in our faculty of medicine. 1,500 professors in your faculty? Yeah, 1,500 professors in our faculty. Nil salary, what's a nil salary? A salary is no, a nil salary is a no salary. We don't pay them anything. And they teach residents and interns voluntarily, take them on, another 7 or 8 hours out of their week. And they do that just because they believe so much in transmitting their knowledge to the next generation. So I could tell that story about a number of departments in McGill, and it's very special. And it's one of the reasons I just love this place.
Other questions? Oh, there's a question in the back.
David, nice to see you again. It's Peter Hutchins, and by the way, I'm a lefty, so the devil is still with me, I guess. As I think you know, I work with Aboriginal peoples as my practice, and we learn from them that it's not the youth that are really the smart drivers of the community, it's the elders. And they always look to the elders, and they look to the teaching of the elders. And obviously, these communities, and some of them have suffered greatly, but they tend to respect the learning of the elders. So it's a society that looks back and honors what has happened, and the culture and the values, not necessarily driving forward. Now, I know this book obviously talks about the past and our leaders, but I just wanted to point that out, that there's more to a society than just inventing and looking forward and trying to be different, trying to drive it forward. It's where have we been, and who can help us in where we have been.
It's a wonderful observation. And it's not just studying your history so you don't repeat it. It's really learning about civilization and what's make us civil. One of my favorite stories that actually would have taken place here, because Hugh McLennan would have taught here in Moyse Hall. Hugh was here when I was here as principal, and Hugh wrote 5 books that were Governor General Literary Award winners. Not 1, not 2, not 3, but 5. His last book was called Voices in Time. It was set probably in Montreal, and it would be about the year 2050, and that there'd been some great calamity, probably a nuclear war, but something that had wiped out most of the peoples in the world. And it had largely wiped out our sense of history and our sense of our past, everything the elders taught us. And one of his characters was a very old professor who remembered as a young student being at a university before this calamity, when one studied one's history, one had a sense of civilization. And the passage in the book goes this way. The professor was saying to another young student, he said, civilization is like a garden next to a jungle. If you don't constantly cultivate it, nourish it, care for it, the weeds will take over from the flowers and the vegetables, and when the weeds take over, the jungle takes over, and that's the end of the civilization. So what Hugh was trying to tell us is that civilization is something that you care for, you nurture, you cultivate very carefully, and you would cultivate it by understanding the lessons of the elders and the wisdom that they are passed on to the next generation. And you're right, in our age of acceleration, we have a tendency to forget that. I think that's why Tom Friedman called his book, Thank You for Being Late, because it's about a discussion he had with a parking attendant who was late, and they had a little opportunity to reflect a bit.
There was another question at the very, very back.
Good evening. My question is about how sometimes when we talk about innovation, it becomes a superficial buzzword. And sometimes we see companies, for example, take out a physical space, put some furniture in there and say, there's our innovation lab, and there's nothing more that comes after that. So I'm wondering, in your inspirational speech to us and in your greater project of calling for more Canadian innovation, how do you make sure we're doing something that's more than appearance and superficial innovation?
Well, I think we remind ourselves of that root word, innovare, which means to refresh or alter, refresh or alter. And that means constantly refreshing, constantly altering. And it comes with that constructively critical attitude of, can we do this better? You know, a very positive thing. One of my favorite couplets comes from George Bernard Shaw. Some people see things as they are and wonder why. We dream of things that ought to be and ask why not. And I love that couplet because the first line is really sort of the essence of a university. Some people see things as they are and wonder why. We wonder, we ask why. That's curiosity. That's a very good thing. But I especially love the last line because it is, we dream, that is really thinking in the future, thinking ahead of things that ought to be. Now that's a moral imperative, something that we should do because it's the right thing to do, and ask why not. That's a command to be, that's an imperative. That's to get on with the job. And you know, if you have that attitude, if you're able to be curious and ask why, and then you dream, you speculate, and you say, you really should be trying to improve things, and then you say, as Charles Bronfman did, do something about those heritage minutes. I think that's a very good basis upon which you operate. But it doesn't have to be as complicated as I've just put it. It's just coming in with an attitude of, I'm doing this, could I do it better? Could I function in a better way with my neighborhood, with my community, et cetera? And I guess what we're trying to do when we think about a smart and caring nation is to build smart and caring communities and then scale that up so it becomes part of the DNA of the whole country. I hope that makes sense. Gentleman here.
Yes.
Thank you. The innovation of the internet and mobile technologies have made communications easier and more accessible than ever. And with that, as a lawyer and a scholar, I was wondering, what's your take on the current state of free speech in universities and broader society?
Sure. Well, it's more challenged, I guess, because of this vast new digital network we have. But free speech, I think, has always been challenged around the world, and the universities must be the bastions where we work really, really very hard to create an atmosphere of openness. That's what university means. It's from the Latin universalis. It's open to everything. And you work at it constantly. But apart from the universities, which have a very special place, I think we have to learn to use the new methods of communication and develop civilized habits around them. The false truths that are spread so widely now have a currency because, one, they're urgent, two, they go everywhere in the world, three, they happen very fast, and four, they don't have the usual filtering that occurs when you have to sit down and write a letter, et cetera. We're learning how to deal with that. And these are tough times in that respect, learning the new customs of civilization with a force that is very exciting, but is changing the way we deal with one another. It took the printing press 3 centuries to reach half of the population of Europe and transformed it from being a backward society, more backward, back behind China, Islam, and India, for example. Took 3 centuries to reach half the population and therefore liberated Europe. The free speech, the learning that was based on reasoning, to be able to read the Bible in your own language rather than have it transferred in Latin that you didn't understand, with great cathedrals that were to inspire awe, etc. big transformation in Europe. The internet took less than 10 years to reach a majority of the population in the world. That's how exponential that change is. And we're still learning, I guess, how to harness that. I think this is a great time in history to be alive, especially to be a teacher, because the teacher is no longer the fountain of all information. The data is at the fingertips. And yet the trick is to move from data to information to knowledge, and with any luck, a little bit of wisdom, something that's tried and true. And teachers, of course, have the responsibility of helping people to develop the questions that you put to the data to make sense of it all. And free speech, just like diversity, is how you develop the richness of different ideas coming together, with any luck, developing a synthesis from them or a common ground that people can move ahead.
One last question. Oh, I don't know, over there?
Good evening. My name is Raad Jassim. I'm the president of the McGill Course Lecturers and Instructors Union. There's about thousands of us at McGill. And I actually received, and I shook hands with you a couple of decades ago for my second degree from McGill. I wasn't capped. I was doing my graduate degree. And I would love to shake hands again with you tonight to see whether I remember how I shook hands with you then. And I'll take another picture. Your picture is still sitting in my home. If you visit, I'll show you. It's still there with the date. You bring us, and thank you very much, you bring us tons of energy. You've been here before. You left us. You went to the Federation, and you're back, and you give us energy, and that's beautiful. That is innovation. That shows us that we still breathe. This garden still grows. It's beautiful what you've been doing to us. And I loved your words: smarter, smaller, kinder, safer, healthier. And then this word came that shocked me: wealthier. And I was wondering, how much wealth? How much stacks of money do we need? And happier, just you've attached happier to it, got me confused. Do we need to be really wealthier? We also know there is an end, and there is this 6 feet under still waiting for us. I don't want to discourage anyone here. We are going through that path anyways. So just your thought of this wealthier, and McGill, actually, the gentleman said before, we're always out of breath. We are running, innovation, creativity. And we start actually to forget to smell the roses as we pass through them. We are going to this next step, and we are forgetting history. We're forgetting our culture. We're going to these data and all these. I teach, by the way, engineering, so I don't say what I'm saying to them. I get them in your path of your book. Again, thank you very much for your wonderful words.
So, why do we need to be wealthier? Should we really strive for innovation, for more wealth all the time?
Well, I like the happier of all those adjectives. Wealth is important because wealth improves the human condition if you distribute it equitably. And I think our challenge is, one, creating a lot of wealth, but two, not being as successful as we should be in the equitable distribution of that wealth. And that is a huge and important question. But it's a question where Canada, as a smart and caring country, should be a leader. We should figure that out and do that well. I love, Tom and I guess we didn't run out of adjectives. We had 7, but we could have had more. I love the one happier because it's something you want for your children. You want your children to be happy and joyous and so on. And there's some very interesting scholarly work led by John Hellawell, who's a professor at the University of British Columbia, may win a Nobel Prize for his work on the Happiness Index for the United Nations. And they look at the ingredients in different society that make for happiness. And they tend to be the from me to we kind of things. Those societies that have the greatest number of volunteers do better. Those who give of their time, talent, and treasure tend to do better. Those that do a better job of the fair distribution of wealth tend to have happiness. They would also say that accumulating great wealth does not purchase happiness. But of course, being in a dire state of poverty has produces a great deal of unhappiness. So those are the kinds of things I think that go into a happiness index, and it's for a country like Canada that is very interested in being smart and caring and fair, you work at those things all the time, and you try to do the measurement of them, and you try then to be sure that the trajectories are going up and not going down. Thank you. That was lovely.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for being here tonight, and especially thank Marie-Claude Lortie and His Excellence Governor General David Johnston for this absolutely fascinating discussion, and for the tremendous work you've put into this book that I'm sure is absolutely fascinating. And so the way it will work now is Madame Lortie and His Excellence will depart from the room through this aisle and be seated outside, I believe, to sign books. Is that correct? Yes? And so I'll ask you when they're leaving to, and I'll invite you to please rise.
I think that means we have to go.
They're kicking us out. I'm just going to grab my things.
I'm saying excellent. Thank you.